Hi, everyone. Welcome to Immigration Chat with me, Attorney Lilian. So, today we are going to be talking about the basics of marriage based petitions. So, what is it? How do you get started? What do you need to know before you even get started? And what type of documents do you need? That is what I'm going to cover for you today in this video. Okay? Okay, so the first thing I want to do is just let you know that if you want to schedule an individual consultation with me where I look at your case and tell you what options you have and how to move forward in your immigration journey, please feel free to reach out. My information is always going to be right here on the screen, so you can reach out by calling my office or by going on my website, lilylegal.com. So now let's get into this. So for marriage-based petitions, where do you even get started? The first step in all cases is the marriage, right? You need to get married in order to be able to file a marriage-based petition. That's just how it works. And if you are not married yet, you can start planning. It is okay to still be in the planning process before coming to see me. But before we can actually file anything, you need to be married. And there's more. If you are going to get married outside of the US, or if you are marrying someone that is that was already married before, or you yourself were married before, there's certain things you need to be aware of before you even get married. So number one, if you're getting married outside of the US, you need to make sure either you're physically there for the marriage or you consummate the marriage before you file. So there's something called proxy marriage where you can get married outside of the US. They'll do the whole ceremony, but you're still physically in the US. But in order for that to count for immigration purposes, right, it doesn't mean that it couldn't count, but in order for it to count, you will have to see each other and prove that you've seen each other and consummated your marriage before your marriage will be considered legal and valid. Okay, so those are the first thing you need to know. First, your marriage has to be valid, and you have to show that either you were there when you got married or that you saw each other and consummated your marriage before you filed. Okay, so the second thing, like I said, if you are getting married to someone that was previously married or you yourself was previously married, we need to make sure that your divorce was legal and will be recognized in the United States. So depending on the state you're in, I'm in Massachusetts, physically in Massachusetts. Massachusetts does not recognize divorces where neither of the parties live in the country where the divorce took place. So let's say you and your previous spouse lived in Nigeria. You both moved to the US, but instead of getting divorced in the US, you got divorced in Nigeria. And this happens a lot, and I want people to understand how this can happen. So people have the misconception that because your marriage took place in, like Nigeria, that's where you need to get divorced. No, your divorce needs to take place where you live or where the person you're divorcing lives. So if one of you lives in the US and the other one lives in Nigeria, then the divorce can take place in Nigeria. But if both of you live outside of Nigeria, the divorce cannot take place there. So it will not be considered valid. And if you have that type of divorce and you get remarried, file, once USCIS which is the agency that actually processes these marriage-based cases, finds out, they will then say that your marriage is not valid and you have to get divorced again or get the state to recognize your divorce. It's a whole process that you don't even want to deal with. Okay, so first, you need to make sure that your divorce is valid and recognized in the state you're in. That's really all that matters. If the state you're in recognizes the divorce, then you're fine. But if the state does not, then you'll have to go through the process of either having the divorce recognized or getting divorced again in the US. So that's the first step. Now we know that you're married and your marriage is valid. Now we go to the next step, which is proving that your marriage is real. Now, this is the biggest part of your whole process. So no matter what you're doing, this is the biggest thing that you would need to show. So even if your marriage is valid, if you cannot show that your marriage was entered into for love, right, for building a life together, for building a future together, your case will be denied. And you might get charged with immigration fraud, marriage fraud. So you don't want to do that. So let's talk about what it actually means to prove that you have good faith marriage, that you entered into your marriage for the right reasons and not for immigration benefits. Okay. If you are just joining me, feel free to ask me your questions. Today, I will be talking about the basics of marriage-based petition, but this is a chat, right? If you have questions about this topic or any other immigration topic, feel free to put it in the comments and I will respond. While I'm waiting for your comments and questions, I will be going over the basics for marriage-based petitions, okay? So now that we went through the wedding marriage part, now let's talk about the bona fide marriage. So you will have to prove to USCIS that your marriage is real. You have to prove it to the officer that your marriage is real. And you can do this with documentation and your testimony at the interview. So those are the two ways you can do it. So your documentation, I'm talking about, having joint financial assets and responsibilities. So what does that actually mean? It means not only do you have a joint bank account, you have joint bills. So you have joint assets, the bank account, you have a car together, but you also have, your electricity bills, your car loan, insurance. All those things are joint assets and responsibilities because you want to make sure that the officer is seeing that not only is your name on the bank account, but that you're using the bank account for your joint financial responsibilities, like paying your rent, paying your mortgage, utilities, car loan, anything that you're paying that has to do with your household should be coming out of your joint bank account. And that's just something that's expected at USCIS. And people tell me all the time that's not how they live in the real world, that they have separate accounts and, the husband might pay some of the bills from his account or the wife might pay some of the bills from her account. It does not matter. That's what the real world people do. We're talking about immigration, what they are expecting of you. And they are expecting you to have a joint bank account and for your joint bills to be paid from that joint account. And you have to know what's on your bank statements. Both you and your spouse need to know what's on your bank statements, because when you get to the interview and there's a charge on your bank statement and one of you doesn't know what that is, it's going to raise red flags. So again, if you're going to have a joint account, use it. One thing that makes USCIS happy when it comes to proving that your marriage is real is having children together. There's this thing where you're not going to have a child with someone that you are not, planning to build a life with. So if you marry someone and you have a child with them, there's this assumption that you're building a life together, and having that child is part of that plan. So USCIS looks at that favorably. Now, if you do not have a child together, that's fine. That is not going to stop you from getting your green card. It's not. But that means you need other things, right? You need the bank account, the lease, right? If you're living together, you need to prove that you're living together. And this is a big, big deal. You can not have bank accounts together, you cannot have children together, but if you cannot prove that you actually live together, that's going to basically destroy your case. Of course, there's ways to combat this, but that is a basic requirement, is living together with your spouse. There's exceptions if one spouse is in the military or anything like that. Yes. Okay. Yes, there can be exceptions to this. Hi, Adeza, welcome. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to ask. That's why I'm here. But yeah, if you do not live together, you need to have a good explanation as to why you don't live together. For example, if one of you is in school when you got married, and the person that's in school has to live there, has to live on campus to finish their degree, but their home is the marital home. They're just on campus for school, and then they come back home when it's holidays or anything like that. And when they finish school, their plan is to move back home, right? In those situations, you can get around the living together requirement, but that is a basic requirement. And if you don't have this, I usually tell my clients, if you don't live together, you might want to wait until you're living together, especially if there's not, if you're living in the same city, right? If you're living in the same city, but are not living in the same household, that's a problem, okay? And you do not want that problem. So let's meet this basic requirement of living with your spouse as you're applying for your green card application through marriage. So what happens after you gather all these documents and fill out the forms and we send it off, right? So that's the step. I get all the information from you. We fill out all the forms, make sure you have all the right documents, and then we send it off to USCIS to start processing. Your spouse that's not the US citizen will get fingerprinted, and then the next step is the interview. And the interview can make or break your case. You can have the best documentation in the world, but your interview can make or break your case. If you get to the interview and you're not prepared, you don't know what type of questions are going to be asked, or you and your spouse are given contradictory answers, that is going to ruin your case. Again, it doesn't matter if you have all the bank statements in the world, if you have the lease, if you have all of these things, if you get to the interview and you can't tell the officer your spouse's middle name, their parents' names, where their parents live, where they're from, what kind of car they drive. If you can't give those basic information, it brings the officer starts wondering, how much do you actually know your spouse? And is the documentation just done so that it would look like you have a good, a bona fide marriage? So the officer is really looking at you in the interview to prove that your marriage is real, to basically tell them all the things they want to know, to make them believe you. So I've had situations where the case the documentation were great. Then the couple go to the interview and they mess up on the interview. Then they come to me to fix it. I've had situations where I filed for my couples where the case is not the strongest, but based on the interview, the officer was able to see that these two people are in love and they are building a life together. They might not have all their documents together. They might not have the bank accounts, the lease, all of that. But the officer can tell from the interview if you two are actually living together, know each other, and are building a life together. So if the officer asks you what you had for dinner last night, and your spouse says you had rice and chicken, and you said, oh, we didn't eat last night. I ate, I ate pizza last night. While your spouse is saying that you two ate together and had rice and chicken. You see how that is completely contradictory and can lead the officer to believe that your marriage might not be real. Because if you can't even remember what you had for dinner last night with your spouse or what you did the weekend before, if you worked or if you didn't work, if your spouse worked or if he or she didn't work, like those things matter so much. Those little things that we don't think about or we don't pay attention to, they really do matter. And that's why I always, before I send my clients to an interview, we do a whole mock interview. Because let's be real, most people don't pay attention to the little things in their lives, right? If the spouse is the one taking care of the bills, you don't really pay attention to how much things are costing because you know she's going to take care of it or he's going to make sure the bills get paid. So you're not really looking at the bank statements. But for immigration purposes, you need to pay attention to every single detail. So I usually do a whole mock interview with my clients. Sometimes it lasts an hour, 2 hours, depending on, based on the questions I'm asking. If other things are coming up, we just keep going until I feel like they're ready. And sometimes we even do a second interview before the final actual USCIS interview, because I want to make sure that the first time people are getting asked some questions is not in front of the officer. So the first time you're getting asked what bed sheets are on your, what color are your bed sheets, it's not in front of an officer, because that will throw you off if you're not ready for those type of questions. And I will, if people are interested, I will do a whole video on the type of questions to expect at an interview. I have a whole list that I go through on a mock interview with my clients. So if you are interested in that, you can either leave a comment or just like the video, and I will do a whole Friday immigration chat on just the interview questions to expect. Okay. And if you're here and you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the comments and I will answer them. And if you're watching this on the replay, you can also leave your questions in the comments and I do go back and answer all your questions. So feel free to do that as well. So now we're at the interview. You've completed the interview. What happens? The officer will either tell you that they plan on recommending your application to be approved, or that they have some questions and they will need to do some research and they will send you something in the mail. That's usually, if they do that, it can end up in one or two things. So one, they will send you a letter saying they have approved you after doing their research, which has happened for my clients. And then two, they will send a notice of intent to deny. So in this notice, they are required by law to tell you exactly what their reasoning is for wanting to deny your case. And then it's your job to prove to them that their reasoning is faulty, right? That even though, you two mess up at the interview, that your marriage is real, that you're still getting to know each other, or that, the child that you had with someone else while you were married did not affect your marriage. So there's so many things that could come up that I usually, for my clients, I screen all of those things, and we basically put in the information in the front end so that we don't end up with a notice of intent to deny. But if we end up there, we work together, and I tell you exactly what we would need in order to overcome it. And I've had situations where people go to interviews and they bring up things that my clients did not disclose to me, or they did not disclose to USCIS, and that can be an issue. I can't protect you, right? I can't guide you if I don't know what's going to happen. So it's, for me, I try to screen every single thing that could potentially go wrong, and I basically rely on my clients to tell me what the truth is or what's going on. I can't protect you if you do not tell me. So that's the number one thing. When you're working with a lawyer, there's certain things we need to know, because it can affect whether you qualify for a certain thing, whether you should even try and apply for the green card or citizenship or whatever it is that you're applying for. We need to know certain information. So if we get to the interview and the information I asked you about comes up, and USCIS is telling me that you didn't give me the correct information, it's going to be a problem between me and you, okay? It is, because now we have to do more work in convincing the officer that they should approve your case. But if I knew on the front end, we could have had those things addressed before we went to the interview. So then the officer would already have time to look at it and think about it and ask you follow-up questions about it. So we just want to make sure that when you're going to that interview, that you are as prepared as possible. Because like I said, the interview can make or break your case. It really can. And if you're not prepared, you can get thrown off really quickly. So that's the life cycle of an immigration, a marriage-based case. So you start from gathering your documentation, filing, going for your fingerprint interview appointment, and then you'll have your interview. It will either be approved, or you will get a letter in the mail, typically a notice of intent to deny. If you get that notice, once you respond to it, then USCIS will do more research and then make a final decision. If your case is recommended for approval, you will get a letter saying that it has been approved. And typically for my clients, within a month, they will have their green card, and we are off to the races. Now, remember, if you have only been married for, let's say, less than 2 years, if you've only been married for less than 2 years, you will only get a 2-year conditional green card. That is very important, because I think some people don't understand the difference. So if you, on the date that your green card is approved, if you have only been married for a year, 11 months, and 22 days, you will get the 2-year conditional green card. If you have been married for 2 years or more, you will get the 10-year permanent residency card. So if you get the 2-year one, that means that before that 2 years is up, usually within 90 days of the 2 years being up, you will need to apply again, either jointly with your spouse or with a waiver, and basically ask for the 10-year permanent residency card. Okay, so that is the life cycle. And typically, depending on your state, this life cycle can take anywhere from a year to 2 years, and it is a long process. And I usually have to remind my clients that it is not, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we really need to be patient and go with the process. So the process I just explained to you is for a US citizen filing for their spouse that's in the United States. Okay? US citizen filing for a spouse that's in the United States. And the spouse came in with either a green card, with either a visa for visiting or any other type of visa, or they were paroled or allowed to come into the US. Okay? So that's the process for that. Now, if your spouse, if you have a green card and your spouse is in the US and they're not in status, right? That means that they came in with a visa and the visa has already expired. But they stayed in the US, they're now without status. So if you have a green card and you want to file for a spouse in that situation, your spouse will then have to apply for a waiver and have to leave the US to get the green card. The way to avoid this is to wait till you're a citizen to then file for your spouse, and then they can do everything in the US because they have because they came in with authorization. If your spouse came in without authorization, that means they were not paroled in, they did not come in with any type of visa. That means regardless of whether you're a US citizen or permanent resident, they will have to leave the US to complete the process. And you will have to apply for a waiver in order for them to complete the process. Okay? So it's a whole it's a whole different ball game when you are not a US citizen. There's certain requirements, there's certain things that being a US citizen can waive for your spouse. And one of those is the fact that they came in without, that they don't have current legal status. USCIS will waive that. If they worked without authorization in the US, USCIS will waive that. Now, if you are a green card holder filing for a spouse and your spouse worked in the US without authorization, or they're in the US without a status, you can't waive those things. Okay, they will need a waiver for all those different things that they did in the US without authorization. So, again, the life cycle of a marriage-based case is very different when you are a US citizen and your spouse is in the US with authorization versus your spouse being outside of the US, or your spouse not having status in the US and you having a green card. Now, if your spouse is outside of the US and you are a US citizen or a permanent resident, the life cycle is pretty much the same. Right? So you'll start with applying in the US, showing that you're married, proving that you and your spouse are married, legally married. Once that gets approved, that gets sent to the National Visa Center. And then you have to prove now that you can afford to support you and your spouse. This is whether you're a US citizen or permanent resident, it does not matter. You have to prove that you're able to financially support your spouse. And if your income is not high enough, which sometimes it's not, you would then need a joint sponsor. You will need someone else that's working in the US legally. So either a green card holder or a permanent or a US citizen that's willing to be your joint sponsor. And once you have a joint sponsor, then you can go through that application process. Okay. Once you finish with the National Visa Center, it gets sent over to the embassy, and that's where your spouse has the interview. So I've always gotten this question, which is, if my spouse has an interview outside of the US at an embassy, am I required to go with them? And the answer to that is no. You are not required to go with your spouse to their interview at the embassy. However, if you happen to be in the country at the time, you can go with them to the interview. So if your spouse is in the US, you are required to go to the interview with them. But if they are outside of the US, they are not, you are not required. Yes. So I have a question. Can you please help my friend? Yes. So your friend can either go on my website and just send me a message over there, or they can, the information is right here. They can also call my office, and if they're looking for immigration help, I'm happy to schedule that consultation for them to help them get started in their immigration journey. Okay, thank you. So that is the basic requirements for a marriage-based case. So remember, you have to be married and your marriage has to be valid. You have to show that you and your spouse are in this for the right reasons and not for immigration benefits. And you do this by having joint financial assets and responsibilities, living together, having children together, planning a future together. And then you have to basically ace your interview, right? That's the next step. You have to do well at your interview. The officer has to believe that your marriage is real and that you two are building a life together. And then from there, you can get approved and move to the next stage, which is having your green card and applying for citizenship within 3 years of having that green card through marriage. So that is the life cycle. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments, and I am happy to answer those. And if you're watching this on the replay, feel free to leave your comments as well, and I will respond to those. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you found this helpful, please do share it with your community. And if you're watching in a place where you can subscribe, please go ahead and subscribe and like this video. And I will see you all next week, Friday. I'm here every single Friday for our immigration chat. You can spend the week thinking of the question you want to ask me, and then come on here on Friday and we will chat about it. Okay. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your week and a great weekend as well. See you all next Friday. Bye-bye.